the pole, in the polar regions, the Eskimo, the Inuit learned to live in frozen country where it might be 40 or 50 degrees below zero for weeks at a time. It's an incredible human adaptive conquest, if you will. And I spent 3 years in the subarctic of Labrador as a weatherman, and I experienced some of that weather. So that for me, it's incredible that people could survive in skin tents in that northern country. So we have the capability, always have had. It's a matter of learning to change our systems to accord with the evolutionary process which we are now forcing. We have become a governing force on this planet, and it's not all to the good right now. So we have to learn to balance our books, if you will. So if you want to know what the modern point of view on conservation is, take a look at Gus Spett's book or Emanuel Wallerstein, and they will tell you what the details are about all this stuff. 50 years ago, when I began here, John Kenneth Galbraith, the economist at Harvard, wrote The Affluent Society, gave us a perspective on the fact that the economy and the social circumstances we create affect us as individuals. They shape us. They frame the universe for us. We don't see what's on the outside of the blinders. And the blinders, of course, are partly religious, partly scientific, and partly economic. And so we have to learn to lower the screen a little bit to see more clearly, to balance our books a little better. Now, John Kenneth Galbraith had a son named James, who's now one of the leading economists, and he's teaching at the University of Texas in Austin. And young James Galbraith just wrote a new book called The Predator State, which outlines the fact that we have been careless enough to let the greedy people run the show. Now, there's a certain amount of greed everywhere, but if you have an open system, the greediest people will take over unless the rest of us get together and say, look, here's a fence. You can operate freely within the fence, but don't cross the water, because that is essential to the well-being of the total population. So that the object of an economy is not simply to get rich, but to supply the needs of the people. And that means all the people. And of course, there are too many people now, so we need to slow down and maybe even reverse population growth. Not by attrition, but by slowing the production process down. In other words, reproduction has become counterproductive. And so that needs reflection. It needs an assessment of where we fit and what is our niche in the total picture going to be in the future. Finally, or not quite, I may add one or two, but there's a young historian at the University of Toronto in Canada who's written several fascinating books, one of which was called A World Without Women. And that's a world that the Catholic Church tried to create by deciding that celibacy was more noble than marriage, for example. And many men devoted themselves to celibacy and became monks and formed monasteries. And when they did that, without wives to do the housework, they became very inventive. They learned to pump water to the top of the roof, for example, to provide a drainage system to flush away the waste. Before that, women did all that dirty work, you see. And so, but that was only his first book, or one of his early books, A World Without Women. You would enjoy that because it's a history of the growth of technology. And more recently, David Noble has written a little book called Beyond the Promised Land. The Promised Land is our religious assumptions about an afterworld and the neglect of earthly problems that this inevitably causes. We don't deny the earthly problems, we neglect them because we're focused elsewhere. And so our religion has been a problem in allowing some of these problems to grow. And so that's for background. And the problem is, I've been talking about a civilizational task, not the task of the Audubon societies. You can't change the world, you can't change the nation, but you have a role to play in creating awareness. A proper function for this and other Audubon societies, and you're already implementing this to a large extent, since I'm preaching now to the converted. The real task of Audubon societies, as I told national audiences 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I used to speak at national conventions, the task is to be the ecological conscience of the community. If 50% of the population lives in cities and we're not educating them to the realities involved and providing contact with the real world, which is not the business world, but the natural world which sustains us, the natural world which creates us, then it's a mission we have. Audubon societies are not a business. They're a mission. And it takes young people who catch aspects of these needs and possibilities to do the job. The danger is, and you kept this under control, is to grow too big too fast. Because if you grow too big, you become a bureaucracy. And a bureaucracy is one in which the directors, officers, and so forth become more interested in the perks than in the mission. So as a society and as a board of directors, for example, the task is to keep things in balance. You need to pay your staff well enough to keep them functioning, you might say, at this idealistic missionary level. But if salaries increase too much, it will attract people from the outside to come in and take advantage of the perks, and then they'll run the show for their benefit rather than for the mission that originated the whole movement to begin with. And by the way, there's another little book on that by Anthony Downs. It's called Inside Bureaucracy. It was written at the behest of the Rand Corporation right after World War II, when the military realized that if we were going to get behind the aviation industry and become world leaders in aviation, we, the government, the military particularly, would need to understand how big corporations perform. And so Anthony Downs, a sociologist of his day, defined what it is to be a bureaucracy. And it is any organization in which the executives do not know more than 50% of their employees by their first names. If it gets bigger than that, problems begin to accrue because the people in the middle won't let the top guy know